Welcome to this edition of Learning with Human Kinetics. My name is Aaron, and today I'm going to discuss a topic that has been debated for quite some time. Should kids train? In other words, should kids participate in a strength and conditioning program? Is it safe? Now, this topic is a topic that I think a lot of people are coming around to. It's becoming more accepted, but as a sports performance coach, it's a question that still pops up every now and then. The interesting thing is there are many parents who might be on the fence about letting their kids train, but at the same time, they're afraid of their kids missing out and falling behind other athletes. So even if it's with a bit of skepticism, they bring their kids in to train, but to their credit, they ask questions and make sure that what their kids are going to be doing during their training session is safe and not going to injure them or cause long-term issues. The main or most frequent issue voiced with kids training surrounds the idea that if growth cartilage is injured, it may disrupt the bone's blood and nutrient supply and result in permanent growth disturbances. Now, the most common phrase or question I hear is, will strength training stunt my child's growth? That would be an understandable concern. I mean, certainly no parent wants to put their kid in danger of anything that would lead to growth issues. Now, according to the National Strength and Conditioning Association, the peak incidence for growth plate fractures in children occurs at about the time of peak height velocity. Now, you might be asking, what is peak height velocity? Peak height velocity is the period of time when maximum rate of growth occurs. Now, this is usually around 12 years old for girls and around 14 years old for boys. That means that a pre-adolescent child may be at less risk of a growth plate fracture than an adolescent child experiencing a growth spurt. Now, this is because growth plates of younger children may be stronger and more resistant to the shearing forces, which are presumed to be the cause of injuries to growth cartilage. What does this all mean? The concern has always been for the safety of pre-adolescent children when it comes to resistance training. It's not only safe for young kids to participate in resistance or strength training programs, but pre-adolescent kids might be safer in a supervised program than adolescents when it comes to the potential for bone or growth plate fractures. Now, for clarity, when referring to kids in this discussion, I'll mostly be referring to kids 12 years of age and younger. But it's also important to note that kids develop at different rates. That's why sometimes in conversations like this, we should focus on biological age and not always chronological age. Take, for example, a group of kids about 12 years old. They will all vary in height and weight, sometimes up to 9 or 10 inches in height difference and a weight difference of about 30 to 50 pounds. Now, I'm sure you've seen these differences maybe in your own families or comparing kids of the same age at school. It's not uncommon at all and some of this is because of genetics. Not everyone is built the same. An 11-year-old girl, for example, might be taller and more physically skilled than an 11-year-old boy. Now, this is one explanation of how the onset of puberty can vary from 8 to 13 years old for girls and 9 to 15 years old in boys, with girls beginning puberty at about 2 years before boys. Now, because of this, maturation can be better assessed by biological age, and biological age can be measured in terms of skeletal age and somatic maturity. For example, two girls on a softball or volleyball team might have the same chronological age, but might have drastically different biological ages. You've heard of late bloomers and early developers, and this is what I'm talking about here. Now, again, much of the debate or concern around the idea of kids beginning to train at a young age is about the fear of damaging growth plates and preventing the growth and maturing of bones. The majority of bone formation occurs in the diaphysis, which is primary ossification center and the central shaft of the long bone. It also occurs in the growth cartilage, which is located in 3 different sites: the growth plate, the joint surface, and the apophyseal insertions of the muscle tendon units. Now, when the growth plate becomes completely ossified, the long bones stop growing. Although bones typically begin to fuse during early adolescence, girls generally see full bone maturation about 2 or 3 years before boys. So in this sense, there could be an argument made that it's safer for girls to train at this age than boys. Now, research suggests, though, that it might not be an issue at all. In adequately nourished children, there is no scientific evidence that physical training will delay growth or maturation in boys or girls. The osteogenic benefits, and specifically weight-bearing activities like strength training that generate compressive forces, are actually essential for skeletal remodeling and growth. I'll turn this around a little bit. Now, when it comes to adults, say 40 years and older, what is the general focus of resistance training? From my experience in training clients, it's usually increasing bone density to prevent or delay osteoporosis. So if resistance training increases bone density and we are looking at ways to strengthen the bones of young kids and help them become stronger and more resilient, it would make sense to take advantage of this time frame to get them started on the right path with weight-bearing or resistance training to help strengthen those bones. When an athlete is hitting peak velocity height, it's important to make modifications to the training plan to account for that growth period that they're going through and target things like flexibility. You can correct muscle imbalances, and you might have to decrease the volume or intensity of training. Now, if you're a trainer or coach and an athlete complains of pain or discomfort during a growth spurt, keep in mind all the changes that their bodies are going through, but also consider the possibility of an overuse injury. But before hitting peak velocity height, the child, assuming he or she is in a safe and supervised environment, can begin to learn how to properly train in a resistance or strength training program. Now, in fact, a 2006 study stated that the idea is becoming increasingly accepted that osteoporosis is a pediatric issue and encouraged weight-bearing physical activities. The study stated that physical activity and participation in sport should start at an age prior to puberty and should be maintained through development to obtain the maximal peak bone mass potentially available. The reasoning is that starting physical activity prior to a growth spurt stimulates bone and skeletal muscle hypertrophy to a greater degree than what has been observed with normal growth in non-physically active kids. The study suggested that the increase in lean mass is the most important predictor of bone mineral mass accrual during pre-pubertal growth throughout the age group. The reason that strength training and to a degree muscle hypertrophy would be important is to support the bones. When it's most vulnerable, the growth plate can be 3 to 5 times weaker than the surrounding connective tissue. But according to a 2010 research study in the British Journal of Sports Medicine, very few injuries to growth cartilage occur while training, or at least because of training itself. Most of the injuries reported in the study were caused by improper lifting techniques, poorly chosen loads, or lack of adult supervision. So that's why it's important, why it's extremely important to have your child train under the supervision of a trained, knowledgeable, and certified professional. Now, the study went on to say that an evaluation of sports-related injuries in school-age children over a 1-year period found that resistance training resulted in 0.7% of the 1,576 injuries, while participation in actual sports accounted for the majority of injuries. In this particular study, 19% of all injuries resulted from participation in American football games. So just to clarify, that was 0.7% of all injuries, not 7%. In addition to chronological age and biological age, training should be considered. Training age should be considered. A child's training age can influence the adaptations to resistance training. For example, a 12-year-old with 2 years of resistance training experience might not see the same response to a training plan as a 10-year-old with no training experience at all. The reason is because the 12-year-old has already worked toward adaptation while everything is going to be brand new for the 10-year-old with no experience. On the other hand, the athlete with 2 years of experience is going to be much more advanced, theoretically, than the athlete with no experience. Now, once an athlete begins training, it's recommended to continue training at least twice per week. Consistency will always be important in order to continually make progress and in order to increase resistance to injury. I did a separate learning with human kinetics on sports injury prevention and reduction, and I'll refer you to that for more thorough detail in that area. But it's important to note that every year millions of injuries occur among children and adolescents participating in sports, And of those injuries, more than 50% are from overuse injuries that could be prevented with simple approaches like better coaching education, a dedicated strength and conditioning program, and delayed specialization in sports. Speaking of specialization in sports, I know that some coaches encourage sports specialization as a key to having success later in their athletic careers, and some parents follow along with it for the same reasons that I mentioned earlier. You know, they're afraid that their kids will fall behind and not be as advanced or not as skilled or experienced as other kids their age. Among other reasons, though, sports specialization is not as beneficial as it may seem. In fact, evidence suggests that it could be detrimental to a young athlete's health. Young athletes who participate in a single sport or specialize in a single position at an early age are more likely to be at an increased risk of developing muscle imbalances, overuse injuries, overtraining, and even possible burnout. This is where strength training plays an even larger role to help prevent all of those things like muscle imbalances, overuse injuries, and overtraining. Now, according to a study conducted by the American Academy of Pediatrics, as many as 70% of athletes who specialize discontinue playing organized sports by the age of 13. And only 1% of high school athletes actually receive scholarships to play in college. Meanwhile, at least 50% of athletic injuries are related to overuse. So the increase in sports specialization has come from a growing number of travel leagues that start as young as 7 years old. A lot of you might be familiar with those. The argument is then made that if they're participating in an intense level of sport at such a young age, then it's more than safe for a child at that age to begin resistance training and get into a good program to prevent muscle imbalances and learn how to move more efficiently and to build strength to avoid injury. Evidence actually suggests that forces placed on the joints of young athletes during sport participation are far greater and more difficult to anticipate than the forces generated from resistance training programs. In that sense, a structured resistance training program could be less risky and than actually participating in sports itself. Now, long-term athletic development programs have tried to counter the detrimental effects of early specialization in year-round sports by offering the framework to master fundamental movements, skills, and fundamental sports skills. Now, the basic skills that the long-term athletic development model teaches are agility, balance, coordination, and speed. From a clinical perspective, it isn't only athletes who benefit from starting a resistance training program at a young age. In addition to becoming more athletic, research and anecdotal evidence shows that regular participation in a resistance training program can decrease body fat, improve insulin sensitivity, and enhance cardiac function in obese children and adolescents. Now, data from 2011 and 2012 show that in the United States alone, 69% of American kids aged 2 to 19 were obese, and globally, kids with a body mass index greater than 25 increased substantially from 1980 to 2013. Now, it is showing signs of plateauing, but the numbers are still high. This research backs the idea that kids who are obese or considered sedentary benefit just as much, if not more, than young kids who are physically active on a regular basis. There are certainly benefits for both athletic and sedentary kids, but the overall goal of youth resistance training should be to introduce concepts of training to them at a young age. They should be taught how to efficiently move their bodies, get them interested in training as a physical activity, teach them gym or weight room etiquette, and in the end, how to have fun with training. If they have fun with training at a young age, they will be much more likely to enjoy it and be active for their entire lives. So there's much more that could be said about the benefits the kids get beginning training at a young age, and more research will continue to be produced showing all angles. But for more information on youth resistance training, the long-term athletic development model, and youth athletic training in general, you can check out Training and Conditioning Young Athletes, my Learning with Human Kinetics on Training Youth Athletes, and I also had a recent author talk with Kevin Carr, and we talked quite a bit about youth athletic training there. So as always, you can find research studies on our human kinetics journals online at journals.humankinetics.com. And make sure to follow us on all of our social media platforms. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok. So thank you so much for joining me today for this talk. I hope you learned something. I hope you got a little bit out of it. And until next time, we'll see you later.